what I found extremely complex problems of sociology. So it was really, if in economics terms, the binding constraints to me seem to lie, the meta-binding constraints seem to lie in the structure and organization of Indian society rather than in the organization of the Indian economy per se. And that's a serious matter because if that is true, then a mere recalibration of the instruments of economic intervention would not solve for the economic problem, right? The manifestation of this linkage is traditionally done through politics. That is, politics mediates between the state and society. But in this case, that was not true. I saw political organization and even the definition of political obligation, which is very important in politics, as, in a sense, reacting to this economic sociology or this sociology that was inhibiting economics. So I want to speak about this today. I think it's important enough that I'm writing a book about India's political economy, which basically says that you guys are going to grow up in a country that's becoming a basket case. And I feel sorry for you because it wasn't a basket case for most of my life and I'm in my early 50s. But you are in your 20s, presumably. That's not a nice place to be, but it's a very common place to be. Most economies are basket cases. For every China and South Korea, you have in Egypt, a Philippines, a Brazil, a South Africa, a Turkey. These are finished places. The trouble with basket cases also is that they take a long time to stop being basket cases. And even then, as in the Turkish case, they can fail quite spectacularly, just when you think they're succeeding, or the Brazilian case. Some are basket cases in perpetuity, or it would seem in perpetuity, like the Philippines or Egypt. But generally, the development transformation movie has a sad ending. The happy ending is quite rare. And I'm afraid India, we were lucky that the possibility of a happy ending was there for a long time, but I don't think it's there now. Now we are in for a long period of being a basket case because I think as a citizenry, we have decided that we prefer that state of affairs to any other. So a third of my book is about society. So this is more a prelude and an encouragement for you to buy it. It should be out by next April. Let me start by telling you about the India that I, as an upper middle class son of a journalist and banker, grew up in Bombay and then in Delhi, lived in when I was your age. That would be the late 80s. It was a very boring place to be 20. It was a comfortable place to be. And in a sense, there were many joys, small joys to being 20 in the 1980s. But there was also intense boredom, which is quite typical of a loser economy, because there was very little to aspire to. The first thing that you understood when you were growing up was that the India story was a very small story, and you were part of the periphery of action when it came to the globe. Now you could participate in this story and become a big shot in it by doing some things which I'll come to in a minute. But otherwise, the first aspiration of most people, especially if you came from a commercial city like Bombay, like I did, was to stop playing this game and move on to a more lucrative game. So you didn't want to play hockey in India, you wanted to play hockey in Australia. You didn't want to be a doctor in India, you wanted to be a doctor in the US. You didn't want to be an economist in India, you wanted to be an economist elsewhere. Or you participated in the game, and the best way to participate in the game was not to try and be an entrepreneur or make a lot of money or do a startup, but to join those who administered the game, because that India, for the elites and everybody else, including the elites, and this is important, everything was rationed. Everything. Your education was rationed. Your healthcare was rationed, in the sense that you had very limited opportunities to override the rationed, publicly provided education and health by buying it privately. When I was in my young man in Bombay, there was just Lok Hospital, and there was Breach Candy, and there was Nanavati Hospital. That was about it. And we were considered to be really modern and hip, because in Delhi, there were no hospitals other than AIIMS and that sort of thing. Calcutta, there were no hospitals other than, whatever public hospitals existed. So Bombay was considered really private sector, cutting edge, because we had these 3 private hospitals that we could go to. Your food was rationed. And rationing happened in 2 ways there. It either happened through import controls, or it happened through lack of availability. So you had to work. If you wanted to get more sugar than you got in the ration shop till the mid-80s, you had to work pretty hard to go and find it. It wasn't that easy that you just went to the market and bought it like you do today. If you wanted to buy a bottle of scotch, forget single malt, just scotch. Nobody knew what single malt was in those days. Black label was, red label, black label. And you'll see pictures in the 70s of Raj Kapoor and all these film actors all drinking red label, which those who drink whiskey should know is a horrible whiskey, but it's imported. So either you had access to the embassies, or you were in the armored corps of the Indian Army or the Navy, or if you were private, you simply couldn't go to the shop and buy it. There was nothing in the shop that gave it to you. There was no chocolate. There was only Cadbury and Amul. There was no Lindt. There were no shiitake mushrooms. Your air travel was rationed, because even if you had the money, there was only one airline and they were always full. Railway tickets, there was no computerization. It took 6 to 9 months to buy a ticket. That was also rationed. So your travel was rationed. Your holidays were rationed because there were no hotels or very limited numbers of hotels. And therefore you relied on the extensive public sector guest house system, which was always full. So your life was rationed. You couldn't buy any cars. Even those had a waiting list. Even Bajaj scooter had 3-year waiting list. Maruti 800 had 4-year waiting list. And if you wanted to buy a foreign car, you had to wait for a diplomat to sell it to something called the State Trading Corporation second hand. And then if you were like Tata, you went and bought a second hand car. Okay. Your cinema tickets were rationed. There was no video, nothing. So black money, black market hota tha cinemas. I hope you're getting a picture of what I'm saying. Everything was rationed when I was growing up as a child. Which is why, if you played this game in those days, then it was best played by being someone who was part of a system where you ration these things, which is the government of India in all its dimensions, or the military where you opted out. Okay. These were the 2 places you had to be were you to be in this game. Otherwise, you were better off really quitting the game and becoming an immigrant. Right? And if you were an immigrant, then you had access to something called foreign exchange, which enabled you to buy many things that Indians couldn't buy by jumping the rationing queue, including railway tickets. There was a foreign tourist quota. Airlines, there was a quota. So therefore, in this kind of a system, 3% growth, ubiquitous rationing, 2 or 3 important features of economic sociology we should note. And here I'm speaking of the relationship between the elites and everybody else. Yeah. One, the game of rationing had to be played by everybody. But also those who administered the game of rationing and therefore to some extent got disproportionate benefit from playing the game of, from administering the game of rationing, were not paid remarkably more than others. So the difference between elites who were playing the game of rationing and elites who were not playing the game of rationing in terms of income or lifestyle was muted. Okay. There was obviously the lifestyles were better. For example, if you were a member of the Delhi Gymkhana, you could get a glass of scotch. And if you were Mr. Shriram or whatever those industrialists were called, Buffett Lal in those days, DCM, I'm sure you could get a bottle of scotch on the black market. But that is muted. You see what I'm saying? Much more muted than going and killing 2 lakhs of rupees at the Harbour Bar at the Taj. Not many people could do that except an expense account. So individually, you did not see that much apparent disparity. Second, insofar as people were in this country, and because air travel was also rationed and international travel was rationed, they were all playing the same game. Some were playing it better than others, and some were not. So the elites were not playing a radically different game from the non-elites. Okay. Obviously, the game became more and more survivalist as you move down the income circle. But broadly speaking, if you were one of the minority who had an education and had some kind of employment, right, other than extremely degrading employment as an agricultural laborer or as a construction worker, say if you were a mill worker or if you were a stenotypist, then you all belong broadly to the same genre of people. If you had a car, it didn't have an air conditioner. So we all sweated. Typically, I don't recall going to a single person's house, even very rich people in Balbar Hill, in Bombay, where the living room was air conditioned. If anything, they had a large, noisy air conditioner in their bedroom, which would be put on at night. And in other parts of country outside my lovely city, there was no point because there was no electricity, which was rationed. So there was no point having an air conditioner. Nobody bought a generator because you couldn't afford it. Okay. Now, please fast forward to liberalization and post-liberalization. I'm going to go a little fast. The rationing for people like me stopped, or rather not stopped, but became increasingly less important. As we became a full market economy, the things that people like me wanted were available through extra rationing means by purchasing in the market. At the very extreme, you had people who didn't even need to buy air tickets, but could use private planes, which was only a preserve of chief ministers in the rationing days. Only state governments took private planes. I think the Hindu newspaper had a plane. They bought the excuse there to deliver newspapers. Tata's had a plane. Sanjay Gandhi. Didn't see them parked in Bombay and Delhi airport like you do now. In any case, most of you fly more than you take the train, I would imagine, if you live close to an airport. So your air travel is not rationed. Your education is certainly not rationed, given the fact that you're sitting where you are sitting in a private university, which if you don't have a scholarship, I know is pretty expensive, right? Your health is not rationed. I don't know how many of you even been to a public hospital, but some of you must have. Many of you don't need to, right? You're like those people when I was a child, these pretty girls in Balbar Hill who I used to meet, and they were much richer than me. I remember one of them told me she had never been on a local train in her life. So I was looking at her hands and I said, she had never been. That is why her hands are so soft. They were so soft, not like my mother's hands, because wo bhandi bartan nahi dhote the. Soft hands and, well manicured, going to the race course. Never went to a train, never went north of Dadar. So, but now, of course, there are many people like that. If you go to Bombay, I have not taken a local train for 15 years or so. I only take it as a tourist sometimes. So if you go to Bombay, most people now are using Uber and driving and not taking the train, right? Local train. Then also they'll come to that. The local train is very important to the train. You're flying. Your education is private. Your health is private. In terms of food consumption, what is it you want? They don't get in this country. As long as you have the money, unrationed. Now your electricity also is largely unrationed because power sector reforms have happened and you guys are the only guys paying for your power. Therefore, your power is more or less available 24/7 apart from a few distribution failures, right? Many of your parents go abroad for holidays. In short, what I'm saying is that for the elites, up to, I would say, even 45, 50,000 rupees a month, this is very important for you to understand, those of you economists, there are many things that are expensive but affordable. It's important microeconomics. It's a difference between your choice not to buy something because you don't like the price and whether or not you have a binding income constraint for the economists. You're not taught this microeconomics anymore. It's a great pity. There's a difference between having a binding income constraint and the substitution effect working in such a way that you choose not to buy something at a given price. Okay? So let me put it this way, that on a salary of 2,15,000, whatever my salary was, I could afford to travel business class from Delhi to Bombay 3 times a month on my salary. I chose not to because I had better things to do with the money, but I could afford it. Somebody earning 35,000 rupees a month could not afford it, or even 60,000 rupees a month. So those CC curves for the economists here, remember this is an important angle to it, which I've not seen in contemporary textbooks, and I don't know why. Okay. But more important than business class, take healthcare. Everyone says private healthcare is very expensive. Now take a lifetime event. Now, unless you're locked into a healthcare system where you're permanently having to buy healthcare disease because of a debilitating or congenital effect. But I'll put it to you, that is an irrelevant data point because that's a very small part of society. But let us say that you have to go to a private hospital in this country to treat yourself for a heart attack. I know how much that costs because my brother-in-law recently had one and we had to pay upfront before the insurance kicked in. It costs about 7 lakhs. Okay. If you're earning a salary of 1 lakh a month, that is 7 months salary. Lifetime healthcare crisis, not much. Expensive, but affordable. You can find the money. It's not going to cause you vulnerability in your existence unless you have some peculiar microeconomic circumstances. On the other hand, somebody earning 40,000 rupees a month cannot go to a private hospital for a 7 lakh heart treatment. Cannot. Unaffordable. Not just expensive, unaffordable. If you are an IAS officer in the rank of Additional Secretary to the Government of India, wife working at your salary or up to 40% less, I've done this analysis, 2 kids, no other encumbrances. If you don't have any bad habits and you haven't done anything, that even without being corrupt, or at least being grade 1 corrupt, which is taking money, there are many levels of corruption, you can send your children abroad to study except in the United States without a scholarship. Can. Why? My friends have been sending their children, costing them about 20 lakhs to send them to the UK, less to Singapore, less to Australia. 24 lakhs, 24 lakhs. They're earning about, the Joint Secretary of the Government of India earns 2 lakhs a month. If his wife earns another 1.5, that's 3.5 lakhs. Multiply that by 12, 35 lakhs. So one child costs 7 months salary combined. 2 children cost 14 months salary. That's not much. That's not much. So what has happened is that the elites in this country are now able to buy things that are affordable but expensive. The only really expensive thing that is not affordable is real estate, or was. But that you can, because you have a large life cycle within which to do it, and a huge probability if you're in the elite of legacy inheritance, you can, manage. So basically, my generation in this country had a much better life than I did. I made a fundamental error going abroad. I'd have made far more money if I'd stayed here. There was a lot of money to be made by this elite, obviously. And they had a good life. Good life. They became part of globalization. But the seeds of the destruction of the current system in terms of the economic sociology were sown there. Because while the elites were able to opt out of the rationing system, economic prosperity did not progress fast enough, or the economic arrangements we put in place did not change rapidly enough, that was also true of the non-elites. So now you take somebody who's earning the minimum wage or twice the minimum wage or even three times the minimum wage, and think about the 5 things that they would like to do. They're after all earning a wage. I'm not talking about poor people. I have no, as economic agents, poor people are not very interesting. That is why you want to reduce poverty or eliminate it. They're not interesting because they can't consume, they can't produce, and you have to go on giving them handouts. So that's why there's no action when there's poverty. That's why you want to reduce poverty. I get it right. There's no moral imperative for an economist. Maybe for you personally, but it's not efficient to have poverty. Therefore, like sexism is not efficient. You want to get rid of it. It lowers your optimization framework, objectives. So take someone interesting, like someone who's got a job and is earning the minimum wage up to 3 times the minimum wage, right? That would be in Mumbai, that would be about 18,000 rupees to 35,000 rupees, 40,000. So they want 5 things. They want food, a decent meal, not just rice and cereal. They want to be able to afford to buy clothing. They want to buy one house in their lifetime. They want access to reasonable healthcare and reasonable education. And in a market economy, the imperative of human dignity, which is important for sociology, demands that someone who is earning the minimum wage at least is able to go and afford these things from the market. Whether you provide them publicly or privately is a separate issue. That has to do with the supply side, and that has to do with what is more efficient and what is more comprehensive. So when we argue about in the UK or in France about a public healthcare system versus an insurance-based system, we're arguing which one is more effective, but it has to be paid for, either through your pre-tax disposable income or your post-tax disposable income. Correct? Now, in the case of India, none of these things are available with human dignity, which I will translate for you as an economist as without subsidy. And if they are, they're not produced in India. Take food. I don't know what the price of a square meal is. You know what you pay for it, but you know what the non-subsidized price is. Because from the seed to the farm gate to your table, the process is mediated by a system of subsidies, which means that either, as I think you are benefiting from cheap food at the expense of the producer as the elite, and you're benefiting from cheap food at the expense of the producer as the elite because since society has to at least make sure that people don't go hungry, society is subsidizing that entire basket of food, irrespective of who consumes it. They may subsidize poor people more because otherwise they would go hungry, which means we are not producing food at affordable prices without subsidy for everybody. Or even if we are, and the difference is trivial, someone earning the minimum wage gets a subsidy that is unrequited for food. Though I doubt it, because otherwise you wouldn't have these midday meal schemes and things like that. Okay. So that's food. And that there's a lot of discussion going on now, as you know. But it's important to remember that this has happened because the objective of agriculture when I was 23 in that basket case country, which we were and we seem to be coming back to, called India, which I grew up in. If you ask somebody, an economist, they would say grow more food. Why would they say grow more food? They would say grow more food because India was consistently importing food, especially from the US. And in 65 war, the US screwed us. They were supposed to give us some wheat and they dumped it in the sea, according to my father. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. So we ran around in circles, had this green revolution, grow more food, grow more food, grow more food. Nobody thought about the food business. Nobody thought about at what price we were growing more food. Then we got into a situation where if you grew more food in a good year, you had too much food. Then you had a glut. So you had FCI, you had MSP. And if you had a bad year, then you started importing food, even though you had a glut and you had FCI and you had MSP. And that is the nightmare that I think this government is trying to reform now, which had never been reformed before, and I wish them luck. So that's agriculture. The second is clothing. Is there anybody here, let me just stick to males since I don't know what you're wearing, who is wearing a shirt that you have bought at Sarojini Nagar market? If you are, then please switch on your camera. Okay, Fashion Street, Mumbai. चलो भाई तुम लोग बड़े सेठ लोग हो यार. When I was a kid, I used to buy my shirts there. Anyway, this shirt here is Marks and Spencer. Okay, very nice shirt, na? Linen. 3,000 rupees, if you please. Okay. 95% made in India, except this fused collar here. This, इसके अंदर नहीं. In fact, this is 100% made in India. Normally क्या है कि collar की पट्टी जो है ना, ये नहीं बना सकते हमारे apparel वाले. I don't know why. So that is imported still. But otherwise, yeah, 95 to 100% made in India. There's a big movement. In my time, the dye was not for big time shirts like Van Heusen in my time, Marks and Spencer. The dye was imported. Then these button things were imported. The button machine, those eye holders were imported because our buttons both were very bad. Now they are good quality seal, just like first world buttons. No difference between Oxford Street and Connaught Place. So I'm very happy, made in India. But remember, I'm part of the super elite. The 400 rupee shirt is imported from Bangladesh or Vietnam or China. Okay. I want to come back to that in a second because that's very important economic sociology. Why? Housing, you either have a house that's worth 30 lakhs plus, or you live in a slum or a kacha house without adequate access to water, etc. Go to Burari and see. Those pakka houses are not pakka houses, they're called quasi slums. Complete market failure for those earning the minimum wage. If you take the minimum wage in Bombay, then Bombay minimum wages should be able to buy a 22 lakh house. You try and get a quality house in Bombay, even in Dombivli for 22 lakhs will fail. Yeah. So again, market failure. Healthcare education, I told you, too expensive and therefore unaffordable. Make no mistake, I hope you'll agree with me, I don't have time to waste. But the quality of primary, secondary education in India broadly is very bad. It's actually crap. It's really bad. It's so bad, it is quite frightening to me how bad it is. Okay. So I'm not even going to go there. You're all extremely badly educated in school. Unless you went to Mahindra United World College or something. I don't even know. I'm presuming those are good. But otherwise, schools in India, unless you're very lucky and some Tripathi ji was a good teacher, that I don't know. But by and large, as a system, you guys are probably extremely badly educated and you're making up for it, Ashoka. I'm sorry, it's our fault. But be that as it be. My school in Bombay, I went to a government municipality school in Bombay, in Goregaon. It was a good school. My teachers knew how to speak, they knew how to interact. It was still bad compared to, an ideal, but today, if you go there, it's hogwash. Okay. Now, let me tell you why this is bad. This is bad simply because so far our growth has been happening. Clearly, if the people earning the minimum wage are not able to buy food, clothing, one house, health and education without subsidy, these are not the drivers of Indian growth. They're not buying them, so they can't be. That is why the drivers of Indian growth are what when you go to Bombay? What are the leading indicators? Automobiles. Kya bolte hai ye fruit wale? They never talk about health or education as an economic good. Automobiles, airline tickets, FMCG. भाई ये सब तो हम लोग खरीदते हैं तो ठीक है. We had a good game going from 1990-91. From about 20-25 million, the people who could afford all this automobile, all this aspirational people, ना जो सूट वूट पहनते, कोट वोट पहनते, आजकल can't speak, ना हिंदी बोल सकते ना अंग्रेजी ठीक से बोल सकते, कोट पहनेंगे जरा स्टाइल मारेंगे, मॉल जाएंगे, all this aspirational, people who pay to attend wine tasting classes, right? Right down below from them, up to I would say a government driver who is also aspirational now. Who earns about 45,000 rupees, believe it or not, central government driver. These people can afford to buy these leading indicator things. And that market grew till about 10% of the population, which is about 120 to 150 million, I would say. And this is an optimistic number, but not more than that. And then got stuck. Got stuck because of three things. One, it is an arithmetic fact that if the top 150 million consume, but make money to consume by producing what only the 150 million consume, it becomes a self-sustaining economy. Then at some point, as consumption desires of this 150 million are exhausted, they will do two things. They will either save more or they will spend things on consuming what they don't produce. And that is what they are doing today. In the sense that when I said that foreign education is expensive but affordable, people are voting with their feet. People are paying for their children to go abroad and study as undergraduates. So much so that the total imports of foreign education in this country have gone up from $500 million in 2013 to close to $6 billion today. The growth rate is astronomical. Nobody drinks Old Monk Rum anymore. Everybody wants to drink single malt and absolute vodka. I also. Okay? I drink Old Monk for old time's sake, but otherwise I'm, you go to a shadi, upmarket shadi in this 150 million. Even my accounts officer's daughter's shadi I went, he gave me black label. Shadi hai. The problem with black label is you can't make it in India, no. It's imported. Imported. And you want to go for holidays abroad now. When I was in the Pay Commission, the government of India people said that everybody else is going abroad for a holiday. Hame kam se kam SAARC countries mein jaane do, LTC pe. We didn't do it. Okay. So people are traveling. So what is happening basically, if you look at our balance of payments, is discretionary consumption imports by this 150 million are shooting up over the last 5 or 6 years. Okay. They have also, and then and the third reason why the aggregate demand is lagging because of this output composition is what I told you, that the number of people who can buy things that are expensive but affordable in this country is definitely limited. And therefore, things like healthcare, etc., only so many people can go to Apollo Hospital. And you saw after this COVID, what happened? Because medical tourism ended, all these bloody private hospitals have gone, the balance sheets have gone pat, khalas. So already, their business model was not relying on domestic demand to fill beds and to cheat, right? And to inflate bills. They were relying on foreign medical tourism already. So that leads to a great threat. So this particular sociological cleavage, and you must to understand it's a sociological cleavage between people at a certain level in society and what they produce and consume is a very important part of our journey to a middle income trap. But it is more than that. In the time kitna hai?
We can wrap up in the next 10 minutes.
Huh?
Next 10 minutes.
Oh. It's more than that. Because, so let me, I spent the first, 25 odd minutes establishing to you that India's growth story is over because we are heading to a demand composition problem. And you should see that you will have to undertake an analysis where you have to look at the behaviors of people earning above a certain income level, that's sociology, to understand why this is happening. It has a macroeconomic implication, but the behaviors are important. But I need to dig a little more deep into this. When I said to you that Indian society was rationed and that everybody was rationed earlier, and I said that that is not true now, it has a very profound implication. The implication is that the implication is twofold. The first is not in conjunction with anything else. So let me tell you what it is. The implication is that you have one lot of people who are working in a rationed society. And it continues to be the case because that lot of people are the vast majority of people in India, that the attention of government is still focused on rationing. You may have moved into a post-liberal society without rationing, but the business of the governments of India continues to be to mediate rationing. Whether through affirmative action or through Jan Dhan accounts, which is an attempt actually to break away from rationing, or through priority sector lending, or through providing subsidies for low-cost housing, or through the claim that they will create more aims. The government of India's daily business is rationing. And therefore, you will have a state that is very heavy-handed and whose machinery will continue to micromanage you, but not you as the elites who have in a sense absconded from this system. That's the wrong word. I must think of a better one next time. But who have sort of, I don't know what to say. It's not exited. You're still here. Anyway, you get what I mean, right? You're not being rationed. And that rationing game is not something that we do. The entire IAS, IPS, railways, they're all playing that rationing game. That is the majority of what they do from morning to night. And because they're playing that rationing game, capital is rationed, labor is rationed, and no, don't have labor law reforms, etc. I'm not saying it's the only reason. Huh? I'm saying that if the obsession of society is to play a rationing game, then rationing arguments will intercede and obstruct very often economic logic for perfectly logical reasons. Because the main game going on in town is still rationing, except in the aspirational part of society. The second impact it has to do with, this is very important, two things about Indian society which I find very worrying. And I'll tell you how they impact us. One is, if you open the Indian Constitution, you will see that the Indian state is enjoined to provide liberty and equality, but only strives to promote fraternity. Those of you who do political science should know that the state can't promote fraternity. Fraternity fundamentally happens across a citizenry or a community or humanity, if you wish. And therefore, it must be something that the state can promote through action and example, but it's something that must exist in society. But India, you see, has always been, I feel, but doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong there, but today certainly is a very low fraternity society. It is a low fraternity society for many reasons, but one important reason also is that the space where elites and non-elites in a continuum participate in economic and social activity has shrunk because of this division. The way in which my family would celebrate Diwali or a wedding in 1988 was not markedly different from the way in which somebody with half my family income would celebrate Diwali or a wedding in 1988. Maybe we'd have 2 extra dishes in the khana, but they weren't fundamentally different. Okay? Today they are fundamentally different. The way we celebrate festivals. And therefore, the idea of co-participation in festivals, the idea of co-participation in things has now been filtered by income to such an extent that co-participation is practically gone. Every time you walk into a mall in Bombay, as opposed to go to Olympia restaurant on Colaba Causeway, you are not participating in, or Badshah Cold Drink House. These are places I used to go. Peons' children used to go. Drivers' children used to go. When I was young, the local Bhelpuri Redi wala, we wouldn't go to an air-conditioned place. That participation has gone. And I'll give you one place where it has gone in great measure. One, it has gone in school education. Right from day one, you guys are being driven to school. So forget which school you go to. Many of you are not taking the bus. Many of you are not taking the local train. Right? I don't know whether you have or not. Those of you had a fortunate, because at least you have some interaction there. And once you have this headphone, new thing that has happened, smartphone to khatam. So then even your gaze is gone from your community around you. So I don't know what's going to happen to you guys. But in any case, your participation is muted. In my time, we all traveled by train. Now, the difference between traveling by train and traveling by air is that the difference between an Indigo passenger and a business class Vistara traveler is much smaller than the difference between somebody traveling in first class in the old days or second AC in the train and somebody traveling in second class unreserved. So when you go there, you engage with India. You engage in the railway station, you go to the same stalls, you eat the same things. Right? We, in fact, used to take water because those days water was clean. So you participate. As your consumption baskets differentiate, you stop co-participating. And when you stop co-participating, then things atrophy. Like the railways, like education. One reason I've always argued that I think that small towns in India have become unpleasant places to live is also the abandonment of small towns by the retired elite, by which I mean, and therefore, places like Pune are relatively more habitable. That in the old days when Mr. Kulkarni came to Delhi and worked in the whatever, Survey of India or something. When he retired, he went back to Nashik and built a house. That really helped public services in Nashik, because if Mr. Kulkarni called up the local municipality and said, I don't have water, the road is not good, the municipality would take action. That abandonment has occurred to the greatest extent in North India, to a slightly lesser extent in Gujarat and Maharashtra, and to a relatively very small extent in Kerala, which is why Kerala still has good public services. Okay, so this separation and loaf has caused us to consume things differently and not to engage with each other. The intersection of our engagements has gone down. And that has resulted in a low fraternity society. And a low fraternity society is one in which the cost of doing business is very high, because then the state has to spend increasingly large amounts of time in mediating, using discretion. And I'll give you an example of that from Delhi. 2 years ago, the Delhi Traffic Police issued 1.3 million fines, challans. You can't say the Delhi Traffic Police is not doing its job. Look at the state of Delhi traffic. It raises the cost of doing business before the pandemic. 1.3 million challans is not small. How much more can the state do? For better or worse. So you see, the things that hold us back as an economy, that not the ones I talk about on the demand side, but even on the supply side, do also come from the fact that, the fact that you're a low fraternity society requires then the state to override a rules-based universal system, whether through affirmative action, whether through special dispensation, and end up with a discretionary system, which is the hallmark of a rational economy, which you are. And therefore, when you demand a rules-based system in an economy that is largely rational and low fraternity, which requires discretion, your desire for order is at cross purposes the reality of the way your society functions. All the way down to justice. Because then in this country, the treatment of justice depends on who you are and who the perpetrator of the crime is and who the victim of the crime is and where they come from and where the judge comes from and what their view is or what their social norms are typically. It is very difficult to develop a common jurisprudence. That has been one of India's biggest struggles over time. Just even when we think that things are settled of great constitutional moment, some Mishra can come and upend everything, as you've seen recently, right? And that is again because a discretion-based society allows for individual discretion to be exercised through the exercise of power, and then politics in turn responds to that. Do I have 5 minutes? Let me tell you how this impacts us by taking an example of clothing. I told you, we import 400 rupee shirts. And this shirt is made in India, 3,000 rupees. Why? Sociology has been. So it's been research. So I'm from Mumbai, so I went to Mumbai. Let me first take out one economic fact. It's a stupid policy where basically we are putting very high level of duty on synthetic yarn inputs. It's still big and machinery. So we're neither allowing the synthetic yarn industry to grow in India, nor are we, so that is just bad tradecraft. But even if you remove that, there was a problem because I went to the places where these shirts are produced, which are in South Gujarat and in Tirupur, Tamil Nadu. And I went and talked to entrepreneurs about 3 years ago and I asked them, I said, what? In Tirupur ones I met in here, but anyway. So I said, you're making these 3,000 rupee shirts here, volume business. Why are you not doing volume business? Dhanda karo na. I'm from Bombay. I think you should make money. So you make shirts. First they told me about yarn. So I said, suppose we did that, then what kind of, I got very excited. They said, nahi sir, fir bhi dhande mein maja nahi hai. I said, क्यों? They said, वो labor बहुत expensive है. I said, expensive कैसे है जरा बांग्लादेश के खिलाफ? So I checked. I said, अच्छा, you're saying that, South Gujarat labor is expensive and Tirupur labor is, they are expensive compared to Bangladesh or compared to Vietnam. So I said, I'm not talking about setting up there. No? You go in UP and Bihar, you set up. And Orissa and all that labor is very cheap. They said those people are not skilled. I said, that is bullshit. Because 1/3 of your labor force, now after migrant worker crisis. 1/3 of your labor force is coming from there. They have all the skills. Then they said to me, I'll tell you what the Gujaratis said. Tamilians didn't say much, but they alluded to it. That I'll translate because in Hindi it's very, उनका स्वभाव ही कुछ और है. वहां के लोगों का स्वभाव ही कुछ और है. Which means their nature, their human nature is different. So when they are here, we can control them. And this has huge implications to the migrant labor crisis. Why you even call them migrants. But that is not a place to which capital shall go. This is a place to which labor may flow. And therefore, we import 400 rupee shirts. It has to do with the sociology, right? And because of this, we have problems across the delivery of goods and services. The lack of participation, the inability to come together as one unit, low fraternity in doing business. And it goes all the way down to your parents. All the way down to your parents. In our society, which is not fraternal, there's a very interesting article by the sociologist Dipankar Gupta, where he says how Indian private sector and Indian family, how people manage things sociologically, is quite remarkably unique to India, maybe South Asia, which is that reward and punishment are never commensurate. You never know whether your father or mother is going to, impose extreme punishment for a particular crime or impose, proportionately, very light punishment. And that's how private sector also operates. That's how our politicians operate. You never know what they're going to do. Discretion rules. And because of this kind of vulnerable low fraternity society, all decisions regarding your education, unless you're very lucky, are made purely with a view to your contribution to the family's prosperity as a factor of production and nothing else. Nothing, you don't matter. Your aspirations don't matter. Your will doesn't matter. You will be an engineer or a doctor or a coder. You don't count. Your only function is to produce some children, take care of them, take care of your parents, and contribute to family and society. You have no other function in this country. It's a very cruel, I would say that parents in this country are terribly, terribly cruel people. I've never seen a more selfish, and it reproduces, which is fascinating. Just like mother-in-laws torture daughter-in-laws in this country, this torture of the student, this fear. I had to fight with my father very hard and convince him I'd make a hopeless engineer, and I broke my microscope, so I couldn't be a doctor. But rare is it a parent that doesn't push you that way. And why am I saying that? Because that creates an entire ordering in your mind of what is important and what is not. This is the only country in which I've seen engineers and chartered accountants being treated as intellectuals. Because they can be very fit to be many other things. They're certainly not fit to be intellectuals. And that is because society looks at that as something that ought to be done. Now, that in turn, the reason I'm bringing it up is one, to make you think about your own families. And because the problem is very personal to us. I mean, you can't disengage with it once you bring in sociology. Horrible thing I learned as an economist. An economist, you can disengage with most of your problems. They're there. But once you bring in sociology, it comes back to you. The inability to have fraternity like this in a family and the reification of engineers and chartered accountants also means that when we look for policy solutions to this problem, we always looked and only look for technocratic solutions. You can solve the problems of this country through a giant app plus Aadhaar, apparently. According to the elites of this country, not according to just Mr. Modi. According to the elites of this country, you can solve the problem of bad education by providing it remotely. You can solve the problem of bad healthcare by providing it remotely. You can solve the problem of no income by Jan Dhan account. Okay, this is Nandan Nilekani's sort of, he's a slightly more thinking person, but only slightly. Okay, everything in this country will be solved by Zomato and Swiggy. But that is certainly not possible in the case of education. And for that, let me point to you something. You are called Ashoka University or a private university. But in the old days in Delhi University, Bombay University, just think of the names of the colleges in your city. Hansraj College, Kirodimal College, Ruia College, Ruparel College, Pachiappa's College, Nizam College. Education was delivered as part of a social movement. Healthcare and hygiene involved social movements. When political movements then attached themselves to these social movements and made them part of their manifesto, there were checks and balances and accountability arising from a social coming together which requires fraternity, and a movement, therefore, to argue that these things were important in and of themselves. unlike what your parents or many of your parents think about you. As I told a friend of mine, 89 batch IAS officer, I said, yeah, you got educated to join the IAS. The reason that the officers earlier were so much better than you is they got educated, and because they were educated, they were able to join the IAS. There's a big difference. Okay. So that is finally the other thing that is holding that up, that the possibility for change of getting out of this mess is also hampered by economic sociology, which is forcing us into technocratic solutions to things that require participation and collective action. And the one thing that technology does not do is facilitate or enable collective action. It may enable collective organization. It cannot enable collective action because that is something that fundamentally arises from society. So to conclude, I hope I have shown you three things. One, that sociology plays, that the nature of the economic problems I've described to you is inadequate, is all the things that suits say, low cost of doing business, bad, no rules, discretion, and the output composition of demand problem, which I've been highlighting. But all these have important sociological manifestations. And understanding this economic sociology leads me to Great Depression, because I realized that therefore changing this prime minister may help me retain, because, continue to be perhaps, changing this prime minister will not solve my problem. Rahul Gandhi will also not solve my problem, nor will Rathin Roy becoming the chief economist or the finance minister of India, because I can't do much with economic tools, because the context in which they operate are very limited. And that context involves what? Low fraternity needs to be fixed. I don't know how to do that. I don't know. But I know that if I don't fix that, and if I don't fix the alienation of the fact that one part of society is rational and the other is not, and one part of society is able to consume things that are expensive but affordable and the other is not, I will not be able to fix the output composition of demand problem. I know that low fraternity is resulting in the continuance of, in fact, the reification and the multiplication of discretion-based governance. And therefore, a rules-based system will not change unless I'm able to bring a change in the way in which society collaborates. And finally, the last point that I made, and this is affecting us in as much as that we are becoming dependent on cheap imports of shirts, because we are not able to come together as a society to produce those shirts where labor is cheap, right? And finally, low fraternity has meant, and the kind of social responses that we are giving to problems, because we want to mask the fact that we have deep social problems that are the cause of our economic backwardness, is in contemporary times a misplaced belief that technology will provide you with a bypass override to these problems, and that also, I'm afraid, will not work. So you have a very dismal future ahead unless you get out of here. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk, Dr. Roy. So I would start off with this question because we have had questions on the similar line. You've painted us a picture where you've shown us that the issues are fundamental and go down to the basic unit of a family, right? And because these are sociological in nature, these can't be changed with the stroke of a pen where you change the law or you make an app, right? So you alluded to this, but how do we then bring about a sociological change in the mindset of people? And there's one more question which says, can the Bimaru states then hope to develop? If this is because it seems like this disparity has been growing for a long time and somehow people have gotten comfortable with it. So how do we bring about this change?
I think if I had an answer to that, I would be one second. If on the lights, if I had an answer to that, I wouldn't be moving out of here to run a think tank in London yet. I can only prepare. Well, the answer to that is very simple. It's staring at you in the face. Sahil, since you're the only guy whose camera is on, I have to disproportionately ask you. Do you have an ideology?
No.
You're not alone. you must have a fundamental belief in what ails this society and the willingness to spend a lot of time, not just you, I mean us, to do something about it and to create a collective that is willing to do so, to be able to solve problems that are this fundamental. And what you're seeing in this country today is one political party with an ideology. That ideology, unfortunately, does not involve solving the economic problem. It is therefore extremely effective in doing the things it wishes to do on other things, but is extremely crappy at running the economy because there's no ideology there. So the economy is an afterthought. So basically, there is no ideology of economic transformation left. And that has to be created. My book is an attempt to do it in the sense to make propositions for such an ideology, but I cannot do it, I mean, alone, obviously. In a sense, it's not my pay grade. So I can't answer your question because I'm not qualified. It's not in my pay grade. What I can do is advise. What I can do is be part of. What I can do is be led. What I can do is offer my skills. But I'm not an ideologue. And what you need at the moment urgently is a socio-economic ideology for this country. If you read what Dr. Ambedkar said, he had warned us about this when he spoke about fraternity. He has a very famous speech in the Constituent Assembly on fraternity, which you must read. I enjoy you to read it, where he warns of the dangers of caste-based affirmative action and what that could create, including, he says, because of our bhakti movement, the possibility that there will become a leader in whom we will vest all faith, and that person will then destroy us from within. Quite prophetic in my term, in my view. So I don't have an answer to your question. But the Bimaru states, I don't know, Bimaru states, the problem can be solved in Bimaru states if you go and set up industry there. See, don't forget one thing, states like UP and Bihar have been deindustrialized. It's not just they had never had industry. Kanpur was a major industrial center. Allahabad had the biggest battery factory in India, Jeep. You had Rohtas in Bihar, you had ITC in Munger. So basically, North India has deindustrialized. But how many of you will go and industrialize in UP and Bihar, even if you are from UP and Bihar? You want to get out of UP and Bihar, don't you? Why do you want to get out of UP and Bihar? For the same reason that if I lived in Osmanabad in Maharashtra, I would want to go to Pune. And I wouldn't want to live in Osmanabad. It's a crappy place to live. Why? Because your social constraints there inhibit your agency and freedom of action. Plus, you bear the full brunt of a state that is extremely weak in providing good things, but extremely exploitative in doing bad things to you. So you live your life essentially as a social fugitive and as an economic fugitive. Now, to break out of that, what you try and do is migrate at various levels. But then now you're developing ideologies, actually, where you want to call that person the other. My family, my great-grandfather moved from Bangladesh to what is now Mumbai 108 years ago. I regard myself as a Maharashtrian. In fact, I think I've lived longer in Maharashtra than Mr. Thackeray. They Bihar mein. And therefore, but I would not have had that opportunity to regard myself as a citizen of India living in Bombay were I to be born today. You'd condemn me as a migrant, or you would say only people above a certain level of per capita income who can go to Phoenix Mall are not migrants. Everybody else is a migrant. So reflect on that. The Bimaru state problem is not located just in the Bimaru states. Because the alternative solution to Bimaru states is let's have mass emigration to South India, and Western India, right? But that would involve again investing in their education, embracing them, looking at opportunities. That can only happen again if you have an ideology that backs it and consent that this single market has to be developed through a combination of bringing capital to where the labor is and labor to where the capital is, in simple economist terms. And that consent and the ideology that allows for that consent at this time does not exist in this country, which is why we're all screwed.
Okay. We have an anonymous question which says that why do you think UBI can't be a good response to this sociological problem, given that it's already universal in nature, which in many ways attacks the rich-poor divide?
Beautiful question. Thank you very much for it. UBI is the is what you resort to when you have lost hope and aspiration for your country. So now I'll probably become a great advocate of UBI from New Year's Day 2021, while having been a great opponent. Khel khatam hai to UBI lao yaar. To understand this, economists amongst you should know this. If you don't, then there's something wrong with the way you've been taught eco, so please go back and tell your professors to sort of teach you this a little better. The second theorem of welfare economics, or if you like, the Calder-Hicks compensation principle. What is that? Basically tells you folks that basically the standard prescription for an economy is do not intervene to redistribute until you have secured the most efficient way of doing things and the most efficient path to doing things. And once you have attained full economic efficiency, which is defined in very simple terms, that you make choices in which everybody is either better off or the same from a change, and nobody is worse off. Once you have exhausted the set of possibilities, then you come to a trade-off. No, I'm better off and you're worse off. Then, by taking income away from X and giving it to Y, I can attain the kind of social justice outcome I want. Got it? Because there's no need to, suppose you are no better off than me, and I get better off. In an ideal world, of course, it doesn't work that way. You shouldn't feel bad. It's only if you get worse off and therefore I get better off that you feel bad. So that compensation principle is for that. Now, that would normally apply as an economist to me. If your economy growth is gone, you have no aspiration, you're going to be where you are today for the foreseeable future, you've attained the maximum Pareto efficient equilibrium you could. And for many years, I was not willing to accept this. Even Narega, I always used to say that we need to exit from, how can an economy that aspires to grow at 10% a year have an employment guarantee program? It doesn't make sense. If it's growing properly, if it is growing through productive inclusion, then the need for an employment guarantee program should progressively go down. And only occur at the margin. It cannot be the mainstay unless there is massive failure going on. Now, unfortunately, I know that massive failure is going on. Now I think the failure has become permanent, and COVID has actually established a body blow, even to what I was arguing earlier, that we have 5, 6, 7 years to deal with this. That time now has been bought by COVID. Yes, I guess we will have to have universal basic income. Thank you for that question. I will probably write that in my next column, that I've changed my mind because this is now become a zero aspiration, insecure, riven, disunited society that is represented by the focus on a film star's drug habits as opposed to the immediate problems confronting us in our daily lives. Yes, good point. Thank you.
So we have a question from Rangam which says, the socio-economic challenges may be difficult to resolve at the national level, but what about the failure of the same at the state level? That should be easier to address with adequate resolve and leadership.
Not necessarily. You can see that it is resolved better, for example, in the state of Kerala. Or even actually, if you take North India, I would say from my experience in working with countries, it is slightly better solved in Rajasthan, but only slightly than Madhya Pradesh. Then the reason for that is the things I've been telling you about the elites. Elites are a very important part of, remember, oligarchies run countries, contrary to the whole business of democracy has been one in which you have tried to make sure that oligarchies run countries, and a progressive social democrat would want more and more people to participate in that running and the interests of the greater to be served. But for better or worse, the quality by which oligarchies operate countries is determined by oligarchies. Now, if oligarchies are divorced, this is a problem across the world, I think. Today I don't need to have any Indian friends. I love sushi, Actually, I'll tell you, I love unagi. My father didn't know what unagi was. So if I eat, drink, consume, literate on a global landscape, I don't need to deal with non-oligarchs in my country except at a level of superiority or service provision. That is as true of any state in this country as any other, because if you're from Bihar, what do you want to do? The first thing you want to do is emigrate to Delhi and join a wine club here and a reading group here and go to Ashoka University. No, you don't want to interact with Bihar. So those constraints will not change. You don't want to retire in Bihar, certainly. Your forefathers did. Your forefathers did. A friend of mine just had to go back to Munger because his mother passed away. Munger. And his father was a senior public sector official. But he chose to retire in Munger. This fellow, my friend of mine, has bought a flat in Ghaziabad. He's never going back to India. है ना? तो ये समस्या ऐसे नहीं जाएंगी बीमारू स्टेट्स में कहीं भी.
We have a question from Varnika Gupta which says, thank you for this phenomenal talk. I wanted to ask what your opinions are on economic tools such as commodity task reforms with respect to recent switch to GST for restoring the economy and demand composition. The GST was supposed to uplift the common man. Do you think it worked?
GST is irrelevant to this. Sorry. It's an important reform in other administrative contexts, but in the context of this conversation, the GST is irrelevant.
We have an anonymous question which says, in sociology, we study thinkers like Marx and Weber who were ideologically doubtful about capitalism. Marx even argued for a post-capitalist society. How do you see these sociological proponents?
I find them very interesting. I've learned a lot from them. I've learned a lot from looking also at political theorists who've talked about justice. Learned a lot from even work on totalitarianism more recently. But I have not quite found anything that sufficiently captures the kind of sociology, economic sociology that I've been describing to you. There's a very interesting book by a chap called Navlaka. He's now passed away, on elites and how elites in India are linked to each other through family kinships and all that. That to an extent speaks to my point in a negative way, that in the sense that this book was written in 89. And in 89, you see, our elites were small enough. Remember, in those days also, there's one more thing I didn't tell you. To run that kind of khachad economy that I grew up in, you didn't need more than 3 IIMs, 4 IITs, right? 1 ISI, 1 St. Stephen's College, and 1 Allahabad University, maybe 1 Rajasthan University, something you needed, St. Xavier's College. But as we grew and tried to scale up that education that gave you, an oligarchy that was equipped, we failed. Right? And this failure meant that the elite have opted out. And therefore, that so much demand has gone out. That's the point I'm trying to make. This point I'm not able to find really any literature. I'll be very grateful for any suggestions.
So as a student of economics, I would like to ask this. We've seen that it's a sociological problem that we're looking at a fundamental level. Even at the level of a state, it's a big journey from identifying what the problem is, what the Pareto optimal policy would be, and being able to implement it. So these two important components, which would be the sociology of these things and the political economy, why are these not a part of the conversation in mainstream economics, and how can we bring this about?
The mainstream economics is a very good question. Thanks. Mainstream economics essentially responds to crises that happen in places where money is made. And then those are adapted and customized to other places. That's been the tradition, including Marx. Okay. A problem of economic sociology such as we have, I would say, is something that we're not able to recognize because professionally, our ability to sort of abandon the word development in our discourse reflects to you how crippled we are intellectually. When you have progressed enough to speak of the human condition in terms of transformation, in terms of resilience, why do we still use the word Vikas? Vikas means what? Vikas means a multidimensional progress to a state of affairs which some other people have already reached. And that is the lens by which economics looks at resilience, transformation, and prosperity. And I'll give you an example as an economist, very interesting, not to do with this conversation. Climate change. My big argument with the West in climate change was that your desire is that we adopt energy efficient ways of consuming energy at the same per capita magnitudes that you do before we have the means to consume that level of energy. So a chap in Norway can afford to sit in his shirt sleeves at home with -30 weather outside but argue that all the heating has been provided by, I don't know, farting or wind or something, right? And you're saying that, oh, but you're consuming only 1/10 of that my level of energy, but you're consuming it through burning coal, and that is bad. So my argument was no. As an economist, no. I want to see a common energy budget irrespective of how it is financed. First, I want the Pareto efficient solution, which is we all reduce our consumption of energy and the distribution of that consumption. Then we further increase the efficiency by changing the source by which energy is produced. Whereas you are saying that you want to continue your consumption, which level I'm not at. You understand? So the teleology of how we do economics itself inhibits us from bringing in sociology. So if you look at Gary Becker and the kinds of problems that he deals with, you will find that the use of, because I've been studying this, I've been looking for economists working on sociology. Basically, it amounts to risk. Or if you look at some interesting work by Rohini Pandey and others, and Shreya Iyer in Cambridge on caste, or Rohini in Yale, you will find that a lot of they've done interesting work, but what it points to is something that as an economist we all know and we keep doing it, and we think we have done our job, which is we point to the fact that it is not efficient. I have tried to extend that a little more by saying that it is not just not efficient. As I said, its efficiency, its lack of efficiency manifested in the inability to lower the ease of doing business. But again, as an economist, what am I doing? Just think, since you're an economics student, I'm again I'm building a sort of risk opportunity optimization framework. And I'm saying that I have these sociological parameters, S theta set. When I apply these, I find that it's not possible to have a rules-based system. Therefore, it is expensive. And therefore, sociology is a binding constraint, which we had not observed before. So my contribution is limited to identifying the problem. We are not equipped as economists. That's why the first question that you put to me, I said, it's not in my pay grade, man. It's not in my pay grade. It's not in my pay grade any more than it's a pay grade of a certain chartered accountant in the government of India to solve India's public finance problems. That's in my pay grade. Not in his, you know who I'm talking about. Okay. A certain chartered accountant in the government of India, political level, once asked me, he said, why don't we just take the balance sheet? Why don't we just take the fiscal deficit off balance sheet? So I said, you could. We've done it in the past. It was called the East India Company. Now, if I start talking sociology, I will also make those mistakes. I don't have the pay grade. I can only identify that the problem is here, and then we have to work towards finding perhaps solutions for it. But I do know, since I'm a political economist, that ideology is a very important manifestation of even the existence of such a solution and social movements, both of which are absent in this country. There is no social movement. Let me give you another example. I often meet people who call themselves farmers. I say, "Tum log farmer nahi ho yaar. Farmers movement to Charan Singh ke baad nobody did." You know, there was a politician called Charan Singh who was a Jat, and he refused to go for any Jat function in his life. He said, "I'm a farmer's leader. I'm not a Jat." He had ambition. अब नहीं है. अब farmer हो तो पहले तुम Jat हो, उसके बाद तुम गुजर हो, उसके बाद तुम मरोगे ही. Commit suicide. Go. What can I do for you? Because you're not created that political organization, that social movement which advocates for your cause in solidarity with others who you feel are attached to your cause, right? So you can see the difference between, let's say, the recent Black Lives Matter movement abroad, which had a sort of cross-societal adherence and led to immediate results, quite profound results. Can you do that in India? You can probably do it against the Tablighi Jamaat. That's not going to solve your economic problem, mate. हाँ, तबलीगी जमात के साथ जरूर कर पाओगे, शायद क्रिश्चियंस के साथ कर सकते हो अगले साल, उसके बाद बंगालियों के साथ करो, उसके बाद नेपाली पे करो, उसके बाद बांग्लादेशी पे करो, बंगाली पे करो, हाँ ये सब करते रहेंगे तो आप देख रहे हैं मैं क्या बोल रहा हूँ. फलस्वरूप हमारे पास ऐसे कोई विचारधारा नहीं है. We don't have an ideology which even reflects on these questions, and that is in front of your face. It's in the people you talk to. It's in the minds of your parents and your uncles. It is how your doctors respond. It is what your TV talks about. It is what the movies you make, right? It's all around you. And we are just economists, boss. Not much we can do about this.
So let me just ask you a final question, because a major chunk of our audience are students. What would you tell students of economics or in general to probably show them a much more hopeful picture, or to tell them how to get an ideology? You even mentioned about how we have a over-reliance on looking at data and numbers.
That is
So,
another problem.
yeah, what would your
I can tell you people, I went to a very good school. And the first thing I was taught was that data, I must have utter contempt for data. Data is useful. You mentioned that I had made a forecast, which has now come, everybody has come to my forecast. I only use data to make it. Data did not drive my forecast. I am not data driven. Data is only useful to the extent to which I can use it to validate my analytical framework. And of course, to advocate for it once I'm convinced the analytical framework is valid. Where I pick and choose my data like a lawyer chooses evidence. The main difference between an economist who goes to a good school and not so good school, at least for economics, is that you learn the importance of an analytical framework, judgment, and the use of data and facts to validate that judgment and to advocate that judgment. There are only two uses they have. The rest is all plumbing. So there are two things you have. One is what I call plumbers. So let's take co-integration. Now, co-integration is a test, right? Now, you can't conclude anything from co-integration. You have to learn it. Move on, learn it, put it in your package and move on, right? A coder is not a knowledge controller. So don't be a coder. Don't be a data coolie. Unfortunately, many of the jobs you will get in places, well, I don't know after COVID you will ever get a job, but in places like Genpact, right, are what I call data coolie jobs. If you don't want to be a data coolie, you have to be very clear that you have the analytical capabilities to be able to at some day design analytical frameworks. And the first sign of that is you'll be asking interesting questions. Why did I do public finance? It's the most boring subject when it's taught in India. It's crap. It still continues to be crap. Okay, I've never met an interesting public finance teacher in India in my life. I'm pretty good at it, but I don't teach anymore. Because there are two, nobody has told you this, I'm sure. Look, there are two areas of economics, international trade and public finance, which are really boring. And they're boring because of how we design economics. Remember, economics is a very beautiful conception of the world. It's a very egalitarian conception of the world because every economist who knows anything knows that the most wonderful world is a world where there are no nations, where humanity is common, where there are no gender biases, there are no ethnic biases, and therefore no national biases. That is the epitome of general equilibrium theory. The epitome of general equilibrium theory, right? Now you come to these two bloody areas called international economics and public finance, and suddenly they're talking about countries. Now, if I don't have any further equipment to study them, then what you will have, and just look at your international trade theory and look at public finance theory, these two are essentially an attempt to solve the distortions caused by something called countries. So our professional work as mainstream public finance theorists then becomes just to minimize the distortions, which is what the theory of optimal taxation is, caused by the existence of countries, right? When we spend on defense, foreign affairs, home, etc., you guys will not do this because you're not taught well. I was. These things are called, I know you're not taught well because the textbooks have abandoned. It's not just you, across the profession, across the discipline. Things are not taught well now. So there used to be a book we used to use called Gary Beckerman, okay, back in the 80s. And there they talked about why do we spend on education? Why do we spend on education? Why do we spend on police, army, etc.? It doesn't make sense as an economist because I don't have a theory of the state. So what theory did I cobble together? It was called, beautiful term, regrettable necessities. Regrettable because they come about because the world is Hobbesian. And necessity is because the world is Hobbesian and necessary. So kharcha to karna hi padega. And that then gives you the fundamental theory of the state for a mainstream economist, which is a night watchman state. Then you have to add on more equipment to argue for the state to be involved in the provision of economic services or social services. And then public finance becomes interesting. But the first thing you have to tell a student of public finance is you have a problem if you don't study political science, at least, because you have no theory of why the state exists. So why do we tax? When I teach taxation, I say something fascinating. Taxation is the most blatant use of coercion, boss, that a state can exhibit. And you have not studied in economics, just put T there, G minus T. What is T? T is the right to take money away from you without any corresponding market or non-market obligation to provide a service. It is because you have a political theory that attaches an obligation to the power of taxation that coercive power has then been post facto mandated that it will be used to provide education, health, whatever, even law and order. In feudalism, there was no such rule. I taxed you because I was the lord. Khalas. And economics is unable to distinguish between these two. So public finance becomes interesting then. That is what I mean by an analytical framework for students. You must ask, you can be an economist, and economics is fun, don't get me wrong, but you have to ask interesting questions. For your larger point about how you navigate your life, I can only say to you that you are very lucky in one way. Remember that as an economist, I'm telling you this, you're young. You can take risks. You have come to Ashoka, therefore you are elite. Therefore, you have an obligation almost to take risks, but take smart risks. And join yourselves into providing an answer to the question I did, because it is only going to come from your generation or maybe half a generation above you. I should be following you tomorrow. I can be a resource person, but do not look at my generation for guidance because we have failed you. And that is why you're in this situation. The last person you should be looking up to is me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this talk, Dr. Roy. This has been a brilliant conversation. We've been talking for 90 minutes, and thank you for joining us. And I hope we could have more of these conversations going ahead.
Anytime. And don't keep warning me we are live. I say very little. Poor Sahil was trying to protect me from saying rude things about people. But I wanted the Intelligence Bureau to hear this. I hope they have learned something. Okay. I'm sure they're monitoring Ashoka University. So good luck, IB wala. Apne boss ko dikhao, usko kuch seekhega. And thank you very much, all of you, for the patience. And I really enjoyed this conversation too.
Thank you.